Do I really need to give an introduction to The Last of Us? The game that changed storytelling in the entire gaming industry for the next decade. The game that finally made hundreds of people admit that video games are, in fact, art. We all know The Last of Us, and while we can argue about if the gameplay has aged or not, I think we can all agree that it has one of the greatest stories ever told in the video game medium. So with the success of the game and the buzz the story has gotten, it's no surprise that we eventually got an adaptation of that story into another medium. And if I'm going to be honest, I am not surprised that this show has been great and successful so far. The Last of Us is a very linear game with a lot of cutscenes to carry the story forward. Admittedly, they could have just taken the cutscenes already in the game and recreate them in live action, and the show would have probably still been amazing. Going into the show, I was fairly confident it was going to be a good experience. How good it was going to be was something I did not expect at all. The Last of Us Season 1 so far has been one of the best shows I have seen in my entire life, and one I have not been able to stop thinking about since it first aired. It is so good that it made me finally stop being lazy and finally start making YouTube videos. This video is going to be my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of the show, and I look forward to talking about the rest of the show in these 3 episode chunks. Now, full disclaimer, it has been years since I first played the Last of Us game on PS4, so my memories of the game are a bit fuzzy. I mainly just looked up cutscene videos on YouTube to compare some scenes, so do note that I am not that big of a fan of the game, and maybe some of the scenes and plot points I talk about here were actually better in the original, but I will do my best with my limited knowledge. Hell, I honestly hate to compare this to the game too much, since a lot of the things I love about the show are original to it, but I think comparing it to the game sometimes will help to show just how incredible of an adaptation the show is. So without further ado, here are my thoughts on episode 1 of The Last of Us, When You're Lost in the Darkness. This honestly might be the quickest a show has ever sold me before. This entire episode is incredible, but the cold open for this one was such an incredibly terrifying introduction that told me immediately that this show was going to be something special. I love how lighthearted it starts, with the characters making jokes and the cinematography being distant and in motion quite a lot. Then as it progresses, the characters get more serious, and we end up with a zoom on 2 of the characters' faces to solidify the seriousness of what this man is talking about. A fungal infection that could end humanity with no real way of us fighting back. I also love the meta connection the story makes to the real pandemic we experienced with COVID. The story does have some parallels and references to COVID, but this one in particular at the start was absolutely brilliant and a great way to hook the viewer and make this zombie apocalypse feel much more grounded in reality, unlike most other zombie apocalypses. Apocalypses? Apocalypse? I don't know. Apocalypses. We're going with that. And then we get into the opening of the show itself. Seeing the fungal infection spread and grow is a great reference to the opening of the game itself. But more importantly, the music being played is taken straight out of the game. After experiencing the Halo show before this, that refused to use any Halo music, as well as countless other video game adaptations that do the same, it feels so gratifying to hear the theme from the game being played here. And it doesn't stop here. The show continues to use music from or inspired by the game, even having 80s music diegetically in the series to be used as a major tool for character arcs. Music means a lot to me, and admittedly, if this show didn't utilize the music from the game or took inspiration from it, I definitely would not have been able to enjoy it as much as I did. Thank God for that. Okay, now let's really talk about the episode itself. Again, the show does such a great job at grounding the series in reality, and I love seeing the world fall apart around Sarah slowly throughout the day. The extended time spent with her honestly might make her death later even more shocking to people who have not played the game. Nico Parker does an incredible job as Sarah in this. Not exactly the same as the game Sarah, since they did have to age her up a bit, but her relationship with Joel was just as adorable and heartwarming to see up until tragedy strikes and Joel loses her. Speaking of Joel, when I first heard that Pedro Pascal was cast as Joel, I was unbelievably happy, and I am unbelievably happy to say that so far, he has killed it in this role. I think generally the actors in this show are much more quiet and subtle than in the game, which I feel works better for this format, and Pedro as Joel is no exception to that rule. Pedro in general does such an incredible job at acting subtly with body movements and the way he talks, and I love seeing what he adds to the character of Joel so much. Joel in particular is a very closed-off character after the time skip. So casting someone who can still give off an incredible performance while being closed off is important, and they did a perfect job with that. You wanna know who else is cast perfectly in this show? Ellie, played by Bella Ramsey.
Count slowly and clearly from 1 to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Slowly and clearly.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You.
Now, this was the performance I was probably the most skeptical of, and that's mainly because I didn't know Bella before the show, and Ashley Johnson as an actress is one that I have a lot of personal attachment to. Not just because of The Last of Us, but other projects like Infinity Train and Critical Role. But just like the opening of this episode, I immediately fell in love with her Ellie. Now, to be fair, we still have a little bit to go before we get to the big moments for Ellie. But so far, I think she has killed it, and her introduction was absolutely hilarious. And honestly, out of all the characters in the series so far, Ellie feels the most like the one they just ripped right out of the game and placed in the show. Obviously, that doesn't include Merle Dandridge as Marlene, since they literally did just take the same actress from the game. Which, as a Half-Life fan, who is still very bitter about how Valve treated her with Half-Life Alyx, seeing her in this show felt very vindicating. But anyway, Bella Ramsey as Ellie so far has been incredible. And one thing in particular I love about this Ellie is how much the show is placing a focus on her violent side early on, even in just this first episode. This brings me to the incredible ending of this episode. We got an incredible cold open to start off this series, and we get an incredible cliffhanger to end this first episode. It's gonna be hard for me to talk about the foreshadowing this scene does without going into specifics on the ending of part 1 and the plot of part 2, and I do want people who are currently only watching the show to be able to watch this video. So all I will say is, I love how they took this somewhat smaller scene from the game and used it to show off Joel's trauma from losing her daughter, using that to protect Ellie in blind rage, and Ellie herself not crying like Sarah did when Joel had to kill their neighbor to protect her, but looking in awe. This moment blew my mind watching it the first time, and I am so happy this was the intention of the creators after listening to the podcast. There was no need for them to include this scene, or hell, any of the other additions in this episode, but they did, and they did it perfectly. I also think the fact that this is both an already established story and that the sequel, part 2, has already been written helps the writers to be able to change some of the weaker parts of the original and be able to build up to future events even better than the game already did. Episode 1 was the perfect introduction to the show and this story, but this isn't even the best episode out of the first bunch. Not even close! And I am so excited to get to that episode, but first, let's talk about another incredible episode. Episode 2, Infected.
No! We're not leaving her! Get off me, you!
So you might have noticed there was one character I lacked to mention from the first episode, and that was for a good reason. While Tess was in episode 1 of the show, this episode is where she shines the most and where I really want to talk about her. First off though, I want to pay my respects to the original actress of Tess in the game, Annie Wershing, who if you don't know, passed away due to cancer on January 29th, 2023, the same day episode 3 of the show aired. I saw a lot of people praising her performance in the game recently because of the show airing, and I really hope she was able to see the amount of love she was receiving before she passed. And yeah, her performance in the game was incredible. One scene in particular we will get to in a bit. I wanted to quickly mention this before we talk about the show version of Tess, since Annie deserves a lot of love for her performance. So yeah, let's talk about this version of Tess portrayed by Anna Torv. I want to reiterate that it has been a while since I played the original game, so if these moments or if moments similar to them are in the game, I'm sorry for forgetting them. With that being said, I cannot begin to tell you how much I love what the show did with Tess and Ellie's relationship. Joel in the show currently is very closed off and doesn't want to form any connection to Ellie at all. So in order for us, the audience, to form a connection to her ourselves, we have Tess here to bridge that gap and fulfill a motherly role for Ellie. These little moments of Tess giving Ellie advice and trying to help her are so nice and makes us fall in love with both Ellie and Tess, which makes her death at the end of the episode even more tragic. There was something that was cut during this episode that could have made this relationship even more tragic, and honestly, I'm still split on if it was a good decision to have left this out or not. You see, in the creator podcast for this episode, they mentioned how the opening for this episode was originally going to show us Tess's backstory, and how her husband and son got infected. She was able to put her husband out of his misery, but couldn't to her son, and so she locked him up in a room. Knowing that she was a mother before this, and that she lost her child, adds a whole new layer to her trying her best to protect Ellie, and make sure she is safe. The two biggest issues with this, though, are how this might recontextualize her plea at the end as being about her losing another child, instead of it being her trying to redeem herself, and hold out hope for the world. Which might not be an inherently bad decision, but might not be to everyone's liking. And then, the more obvious one is the removing of the cold open this episode already has. I do absolutely love the cold open to this episode, and would really hate to see it go. The scene of the doctor saying to bomb the whole town was genuinely chilling, even more than the first episode's opening. So while the episode does work as it is right now, I do think it is a shame we missed a nice way to flesh out Tess's character. Before we do get into Tess's final plea, we need to focus on the other big aspect of this episode, the introduction of the zombies of the show, more specifically, the clickers. Going into the show, I didn't really see too much of the trailers, so I had no idea how the clickers would have looked in this, and expected them to be fully CGI. But oh my god, they are practical in this, and I am so happy. They look absolutely incredible, and the actors do an incredible job and make them move so creepily as well. The tension at the museum was done incredibly well. It had me holding my breath throughout. It's a lot to ask your actors to perform silently, and they all did an incredible job during this scene, especially Bella acting just like I would in this situation. I'm telling you. That scene of Joel reloading his gun had me freaking out so much. Just thinking about it puts me on edge. I don't expect the show to focus much on action, but this little moment was done so incredibly well, and I can't wait to see what else this show has in store for us. Okay, now let's talk about the other big scene from this episode. There are other great moments throughout this episode, like Ellie at the front desk of the hotel, the scene of Joel and Ellie being forced to talk later, and obviously, you really can't deny that view. But Tess's plea at the end and her death is the one I have a lot to talk about. I've seen a lot of people say that they prefer the game version of this scene. And honestly, for me, it is so hard to tell which one I prefer. In my opinion, Annie in the game sounds more desperate to Joel than Anna, and I particularly love the line,
"There's enough here that you have to feel some sort of obligation to me, so you get her to Tommy's."
Hearing her plea to Joel is honestly so heartbreaking. It makes that scene one of the standout moments from the original game. Anna in the show sounds desperate as well, but I think it's the writing of the scene in particular that makes it harder for me to decide which version I prefer. Added lines like,
They will, because you'll convince them. Shut the f*** up, because I don't have time. You get her there. You keep her alive. And you said everything right.
are all incredible lines. But the one line, the one that might honestly be my favorite of the whole show so far, is
Say who you can say.
not only is this line delivered perfectly by Anna, but what this line means for Joel and how he immediately snaps after this is such a powerful moment. In reality, Jesus Christ, why the motorcycle? Why now? I didn't have this issue yesterday when I was recording. What the stop! Go away! In reality, Tess really has been leading Joel in keeping the violence inside him under control. This is showed off beautifully in the first episode during their first scene together. This line, "save who you can save," felt like the ignition of a fire deep inside Joel that is just going to keep building and building until the very end of this season. And I absolutely love how she was able to do this by bringing up Sarah, and potentially even more people the two have lost in their lives. And this line is going to be a huge recurring theme in the story, and perfectly describes Ellie and Joel's relationship by the end of it. What an incredible scene, and an incredible line to end it off. And finally, that last shot of Joel walking away from the explosion, while Ellie sticks behind and reflects on what just happened, on her losing another person in her life, is such a great emotional moment. Another incredible episode in the books, and one that adapts many scenes from the game incredibly. However, the next episode, and the final episode of this video, not only strays the farthest from the original game's story, but tells one of the best love stories I have ever seen in all of fiction. Episode 3, Long, Long Time. I'm going to briefly talk about the Joel and Ellie scenes in this, since, while they are great, they obviously are not the focus of this episode. I love how distant they feel at the start of this. Neither of them want to open up about how they truly feel, particularly with Ellie saying she doesn't feel responsible for what happened to Tess, when that is obviously not how she feels. It's clear that after she reads the note from Bill and sees Joel's reaction, that she is more willing to open up to him and probably would have apologized out Tess if Joel didn't cut her off. I also love how before she read the note and Joel told her to stay there, she didn't. But after she read it and Joel told her the same thing, she did. Obviously, she isn't going to fully listen to Joel now, if the
"What you say goes"
line is any indication, but it's clear that she feels bad for him and is going to start opening up. Hell, that line in this show feels more honestly said than in the game.
What you say goes.
And goes to show again that Bella is absolutely killing it in this show. Another scene from her that I love in this episode is the scene earlier on where she kills an infected so cold-heartedly, maybe as an act of revenge for Tess's death. This is also a great way to show off the violent side of her this early on. Finally, her stealing Frank's gun in this not only puts more emotional weight into that item than in the game, but it's a nice little Chekhov's gun moment and gets the audience excited to see what she will do with it. Combine this with the infected scene from earlier, it's clear that she's going to be a real force of nature with that gun. Okay, that was definitely much more about Ellie than Joel so far, and there's a good reason for that. Joel has a major change in this episode, finally being willing to take Ellie to safety and protecting her, unlike at the start of this episode. What finally pushed him to do this is the letter that Bill left him, urging him to find someone he can protect and to not be closed off like he was. This is the biggest change from the game so far, as the game version of Bill pretty much told Joel the opposite and was meant to be a foil for him. Admittedly, Bill was one of the more forgettable characters in The Last of Us for me, and going back and seeing how they handled his character in it, more specifically Frank, I honestly feel like it might be the only area of the game where the story has major flaws. I understand that the creators didn't have much time to flesh out these two's relationship, but I really wish they didn't kill off Frank and inadvertently did the bury your gays trope. In the show, however, Bill and Frank's role has shifted and is arguably the catalyst of Joel's character arc from this point forward. For this major change to have the effect it needs on both Joel and the audience, the relationship Bill talks about with Frank needs to be an incredibly strong relationship. That's not a simple feat, especially considering this is not just a gay relationship, but a middle-aged gay relationship. One that has a history of being written poorly in the past, if at all. So how do they do it? Well, if it wasn't obvious enough, Bill and Frank's relationship is one that stole my heart almost immediately and is so incredibly well done. I cannot stress enough how great it feels to have another incredible queer love story, one that plays with the traditional tropes associated with them. The story of Bill and Frank mirrors the one of Ellie and Joel. Bill is an outsider, closed off from the world, and not wanting to form any connection with anyone, until he meets someone who is able to break through his barriers and fill a void that was empty in his heart. Frank then is able to make Bill reluctantly open up to more people around him and give him someone to protect with his life. Parallels between him and Joel are plain to see. It makes this story even more heart-wrenching, especially when we get to the end. I love the scene where Bill and Joel first meet. They both have a mutual understanding of each other. Both are protectors, closed up from the world. They may not fully like each other, but they do respect each other, and it makes the scene where Joel hears the letter Bill wrote more impactful. Meanwhile, Frank is constantly urging Bill to open his heart up more, not only to make friends with Joel and Tess, but to care for the world and his own life more.
Paying attention to things. It's how we show love.
One moment that I absolutely love from this story, and a scene that doesn't get talked about enough, is the scene where Bill gets shot and Frank needs to help him. In the literal moment, Frank is saving Bill. But throughout their entire story, it's clear that Frank is saving Bill from solitude and giving him a chance to really live. When Bill thinks he's dying also, he tells Frank to go to Joel, the only other protector he knows. In this moment, it's clear he has put more faith into Joel and also thinks he isn't good enough to protect Frank, which is something Joel will later think about Ellie. Again, another mirror. It's admittedly a small moment, but one that I greatly appreciate. And finally, let's talk about the ending of this love story. Frank's last day, one of the most bittersweet scenes I've ever seen in my life. There's a lot of great little details here, like how the reason Frank decides it's over is when he can no longer draw Bill, or the meal Bill serves him being the same one as when they first met. Honestly though, just like the last episode, there is one line here that completely encapsulates what makes this scene and this entire love story so incredible.
This isn't the tragic suicide at the end of the play. I'm old. I'm satisfied. And you were my purpose.
What looks like another bearing of the gays trope on paper turns into a euphoric end to the character arc of Bill and a bittersweet finale to this love story. In reality, Bill used to live without purpose until he met Frank. Once he did, they lived a great life together in the dark, miserable world. In the end, this suicide isn't tragic. It isn't done from sadness. It's done because they have lived their lives and fulfilled their purpose. Now that they are old, they have made the choice to go out together, something that Bill at the start would have despised doing. Isn't this exactly what The Last of Us is all about? Saving you can save, finding someone to protect, and not being afraid to love again. There is a reason why this episode has been getting so much praise, and it's because this episode is a masterpiece of storytelling. And as someone who is queer themselves, seeing them handle this relationship so well makes me excited to see what they will do with other queer characters to come in this story. And yes, for all you homophobes out there, the gay train ain't stopping anytime soon.
Nobody's gonna be coming after you, right? Like mom, dad, boyfriend.
I'm an orphan, and no.
Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, episode 3 of The Last of Us is the best episode so far, and I am so freaking excited to see the rest of the series. We got 6 more episodes left of this season, then part 2 sometime in the future, and I am so excited for all of it. It's done. It's finally done. I finally made a YouTube video. If you don't know, for years I've been writing videos and sometimes even just going and recording them without even a script. And each time I failed. And finally, I have a YouTube video done. Almost, I gotta edit this part, but it's almost done and it's gonna be hopefully uploaded tonight. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And I get to say this first time as a YouTuber, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Especially comment. Please give me any constructive criticism you have. This is my first video. I know my mic quality is terrible, but hopefully you'll find some other stuff to hopefully make my videos better. I seriously cannot stress how good it feels to be done, to get this out there. I am so happy. And yeah, The Last of Us is such a great show to talk about. And as I'm recording this, I've seen episode 4, and it just continues to get even better. But obviously, there's other stuff I want to talk about, other shows, other games, other movies, and hopefully this is the start of a great future. So again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned till my next video. Bye-bye.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. I live in this world. You live in a psycho bunker where 9/11 was an inside job and the government are all Nazis.
The government are all Nazis!